But when you look at the stock market, that old adage of it's really just a voting machine in the short term, but in the long term, it's a weighing machine. You get frantic responses to everything, and generally you get an overreaction to something that's
Mm,
considered as big news. Liberation Day
absolutely.
was big news, and you get an elasticated response. It stretches far beyond the point of reason and snaps back the moment that relief comes to that particular situation in question. And we've seen it over and over and over in our lives. And people who lived before saw it, and people who lived before them saw it, right back to the birth of commerce.
Emmet, how are we getting on?
Hey, Michael, how are you doing? I see from your background, you're back in France.
I am. I brought the weather with me as well.
Now,
But no,
what
it's
weather
nice.
did you bring? Because we're having a balmy, hot, beautiful early summer here in Dublin.
Unbelievable. I was back in Ireland. I was back in Ireland for a full month, and I'm actually withered because it's the busiest month I've ever had. But 3 out of the 4 weeks were like 20 degrees, unreal weather.
Hmm.
Unbelievable. I couldn't get over it.
Yeah, 20 degrees today, Tuesday, 13th of May. Not typical early May weather. This kind of feels more like late August, early September weather,
Yeah.
which is when I think the Irish weather is at its most stable. But yeah, we love the weather. We're obsessed by it here in Ireland, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, I have a theory in general that like the weather dictates. Do you know how like countries would have a specific stereotype of personality?
Hmm.
And it's completely dictated by the weather. So, like, say Italy and Spain, they would be much more passionate and bravado and kind of emotional and
Yeah,
hard on the sleeve. It would be like, I know it's completely putting an entire country into one box, but that would be the stereotypical view. And then, like,
yeah.
up in Scandinavia, they would be very within themselves and taciturn and kind of a lot less emotion forward, I suppose.
Mm, yeah.
I think it all comes down to like, if we and Ireland would be closer to Scandinavia than to Spain, especially when it comes to like being very emotional. And I think if you were to be like that, to have that kind of heart on your sleeve mentality when the weather is absolutely crap for 8 months of the year, you'd be an absolute bear. So I think it's a form of conditioning that like that's why people traditionally would have that kind of personality.
Totally agree. I mean, the human spirit is human spirit. If you're an optimist and a happy person, and we're fortunate enough to be raised in a good environment, I think you'll be a happy enough person to begin with. But I do think fine weather, blue skies, warm air amplifies whatever positivity exists in you. I've no doubt about that.
Yeah, yeah, and so Ireland for extended periods of sunshine is dangerous,
Mm.
dangerous for the
Oh,
liver
sure,
as
we
well.
get
I can
ahead of
attest to that.
ourselves. Oh, it's the mad crack.
Yeah,
Irish for fun, by the way. We have the
yeah,
best crack ever. And whenever the sun comes out, all the rules go out. I mean, the few rules we hold in Ireland and the handful of rules we obey, we just have, nah, not obeying that rule. We're going to sit in the middle of the road and drink beer if I feel
yeah,
like it. And I think
yeah.
in the middle of Dublin City, is it Drury Street? The
Drury
traders
Street.
on, yeah, I think it's Drury Street. The shop owners and traders on Drury Street are a little bit worn down with everyone just sitting in the middle of the road drinking beer and having fun.
Yeah, like that's a whole different podcast. But Jesus Christ, there isn't one public park for people to go and not spend 8 quid a pint in Dublin.
Mm, yeah.
So that's kind of a symptom of a larger problem. But we won't get into that.
Mm,
So today's pod, there's loads of places to go with this. I actually wanted to kick off with the big news of the week, and that's this kind of truce, I suppose, in the trade war between the US and China.
mm,
We're not going to dwell on it because this story changes every 10 minutes.
mm,
But essentially, as it stands, instead of the original 145% tariffs on everything coming from China into the US, it'll now be 30% for the next 90 days. And then from the US to China, it's gone from 125% to 10%. So this is 90 days, which seems to be this cooling off period that comes with this reciprocal tariff and Liberation Day aftermath, until the two can kind of sit down and negotiate and come to permanent agreement, not ingredient.
mm,
Now, I'm not going to get into this too deep, but there is one point I want to make from it, and it's the fact that Trump has always cared about the stock market. This was so evident in his first presidency as well. And Bill Mann, he was at one of our live shows, and he made the great point. that Trump loves scoreboards. And
Hmm.
at least in Trump's eyes, there's no greater scoreboard than the stock market performance, and especially the S&P 500. And so Liberation Day and the reciprocal tariffs, they were so far away from this thought process that it spooked everyone. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of like, okay, well, now there's just this complete level of unpredictability to this. At least, at the very least, as investors, there was always the feeling of, oh yeah, that this will kind of, he'll have our back here. And there we saw that with the Trump bump, and from the lead up to the election to the inauguration was absolutely haywire stuff. Now, retrospectively, it's clear that all of the kind of reciprocal tariffs and all that were a negotiating tactic. He wants to get better deals and bring all these trading partners to the negotiating table. But at the time, it was so self-detrimental and damaging that everyone kind of lost their minds a bit. Now, in the months since, the stock market has almost completely recovered. I think it has actually completely recovered at the time of recording. Sorry, not from, say, the February 9th all-time highs, but from April 2nd, Liberation Day. So in the space of that time where we were running around with our heads on fire, I think we saw an 18.9% correction, so very, very close to a bear market. And then in the space of about 5 weeks, it's almost like the original thesis has played out, and Trump has shown that he still very much cares about stock market performance. He's saying as much, so much so that the fact that when the market was going down, it was obviously still Biden's market, but when it's going up, it's Trump's market. Do you know what I mean? And his actions since, and his social media activity, his pausing of tariffs after seeing the reaction, it all plays into the thinking that he very much cares about the stock market, about the S&P 500, about people's retirement plans. And almost like a badge of honor, he wants to have a presidency which the stock market does well in, is what a lot of people depended on when Trump came into power, because there is so much unpredictability to it. So I don't know really what my point is. I feel a bit more reassured, I guess, as an investor, even though it feels very volatile and shaky at the minute, that the original thought process hasn't been uprooted in a way that Liberation Day and the reciprocal tariffs seem to do at the time. What do you think about all that? Would you agree in the kind of?
I think it's a very good point. I mean, the 4% of the world's population live in the United States of America, give or take a few fractions of a percent. Yet that country is the world's standard for capitalism. It is the country that most exhibits a capitalist approach, and that to each man and woman to their own. If the harder you work, the more money you'll make, is a rough rule of thumb that absolutely applies in America. And a mechanism has evolved for you to create and amplify your wealth through the stock market. So if we take America as the world HQ of capitalism, one of the most symbolic people alive in the world today for capitalism is Donald Trump. President or not president, whether or not you like the guy, whether or not you voted for him, or whether or not he's the president of America, he is one of a dozen names that you could put forward as the absolute personification of capitalism. Now, the route to that endpoint, or to being a billionaire, is a different story. Whether you talk about the late Steve Jobs, or Elon Musk, or all the obvious ones, whether it's Rockefeller or Warren Buffett or Donald Trump. Donald Trump is one of the handful of names of people who most represents that pursuit of mega wealth creation. Now, he is the president of America. He is the president. A capitalist is the president of the most capitalist country on the planet. And I completely agree with what you said and what Bill Mann said back last November, which is he's a man motivated by a scoreboard, whether he's playing golf, whether he's the best at something or the best at another. We all know that Donald Trump is highly motivated to be the number one in insert subject here. Now, as he wants history to record him as more successful than any predecessor. Full stop. That's the way he wants his history written. So when coming back to your original point, which is Liberation Day, tariffs, I do remember him saying, I know what I'm doing. Like, I don't care what the market says. I know what I'm doing. And he made a speech, I can't remember if it was from the Oval Office or a podium out in the garden or something, but he said, I know what I'm doing. And put it this way, most everyone, I presume, hoped he was right. Not everyone agreed, but when you look at the stock market, that old adage of it's really just a voting machine in the short term, but in the long term, it's a weighing machine. You get frantic responses to everything, and generally you get an overreaction to something that's considered as big news. Liberation Day
Absolutely.
was big news, and you get an elasticated response. It stretches far beyond the point of reason and snaps back the moment that uh, relief comes to that particular situation in question. And we've seen it over and over and over in our lives. And people who lived before saw it, and people who lived before them saw it, right back to the birth of commerce. There's always been an overreaction to news because news brings with it uncertainty. Uncertainty is a catalyst for panic. And in panic, people sell or buy. And that's what we've seen. So I'm not a bit surprised that the market has recovered. I'm relieved, but I equally wouldn't be surprised if it hadn't recovered, because we are living in a world where news travels faster than the speed of light. It just, as soon as something is out there, everyone knows about it. I sometimes reflect about when my father and your father was my age and your age. The way they consume news was through a newspaper, and generally that newspapers are heavy on news on the island or the country in where you exist, whereas now we get news from everywhere. The whole world reacts to world news. So there's a greater accelerant on reaction. And so whatever Trump was going to say was going to have a hit on the stock market. You saw there last week, I bought a stock for Horizon, and I said in the buy alert, this company is going to report, actually it's the trade desk, no great secret. This company is going to report tonight. And the words I said, it's either going to pop or drop on the spot. Now, we called it right. I called it right. I bought it just before the report. It went well and thankfully went up. But I bought in the knowledge that the minute that news is out there and after hours trading, that stock would move and move hard, which it did. And when you take that small microscopic example, multiply it across every company, every economy, we are living in a world that just responds. And I just think that we're at a place now where we just have to live with fast reactions to news of any size.
100%, 100%. And it's so true. You've seen it since COVID, especially, and the reaction, both negative and then positive, I suppose, to the zero interest rate environment that came after COVID. The speed at which the stock market is moving in the last 5 years has been breakneck. And it's tough to really get a grasp of. And I guess this comes back to kind of just reiterating what we always say of like investing without emotion and kind of doing the same thing every month. This is where it really pays off. If you took no notice of what Trump said and just put your whatever you could into whatever stocks you were buying at the end of March and at the end of April, you'd be doing quite well. And I guess that's what we're trying to remind people of, is like the tumult in the middle really, really doesn't matter. When you start to zoom out and further out again, it really becomes irrelevant. And just this ability to, you're not going to be able to ignore noise. It's impossible now. You have the connection to every piece of information in the world in your pocket that you're on about 8 hours a day. It's not that you can ignore noise, but it's that, can you filter it out and realize, okay, well, yes, this sounds scary. And they're very smart, very authoritative, confident people talking about how this could be the end of days. And we're here 6 weeks later and the market is back to where it was. And it was very clearly more of a negotiating tactic than I am going to tax the absolute F of every country in the world and destroy global trade while doing it. That's not the intention. And it just feeds into not being reactive to these things and not changing your strategy based on whatever news story is hot that day or that week or that month.
Amen, brother. If we could only just wave a magic wand and get all our listeners to just do one thing, I think it would be just don't panic, don't react, go long, buy and hold forever, put it under your pillow. Most of my worst decisions were sell decisions. Not trying to abdicate myself from bad buy decisions. I've had plenty of those, but my worst decisions were sells because I got distracted by news. Why did I sell my Carta Libre? I think it was 15 years ago, because something caught my eye that I didn't like. Now it's truly the Amazon of Latin America, and that's doing it a disservice. Okay, look, Mike, we push on. I think what we said we talk about today. We both are going to talk about a story that's caught our eye, that's completely taken us by surprise. And we also thought we'd both pitch a stock that really has caught our interest and has potential to create some wealth. So, will I go first or shall you? What do
You
you reckon?
go. You go first because I've combined mine into one, and I
Okay,
also
great.
really want to hear your story as well because it reminds it's harkening back to
Yeah,
I don't even know. Just you go with the story, and I'll kind of
right.
act guffawed in the
Well,
corner.
listen to this, folks. I mean, as regular listeners, long-term listeners to Stock Club might recall, I discussed a book in and around 2018. It was John Carrew's Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in Silicon Valley.
Hmm.
And
I
it was
have to say one of the best business books I've read. I would right up there.
absolutely, absolutely it. And I think Shoe Dog came out within a few months of each other, and they both remain my joint first or second uh, business books, business story books I've ever read. Absolutely loved the book. And at the time, it really sent shockwaves through the business and the biotech worlds because it chronicled the rise and the absolutely spectacular fall of Theranos, which was a startup which was once valued at peak $9 billion, and it was built on the promise that a couple of drops of blood from the tip of your finger could provide accurate diagnostics for hundreds of medical conditions. And at the heart of the story, is a lot of people will know, was Elizabeth Holmes, who at that time was a black turtleneck wearing Stanford dropout who modeled herself on Steve Jobs and convinced some of the most powerful people in America, from Henry Kissinger to George Shultz, to invest in her dream. I remember when Fortune magazine fell through my letterbox and she was on the cover of it, how much it was obvious she was, in my opinion, trying to look like Steve Jobs. And I think biographers and commentators alike all said it since. But I looked at it and went, wow, this is unbelievable. It was the look at the time. And everybody will recall that black turtleneck that Steve Jobs at least used to wear. And then people who listen to the show may have since seen the Apple TV show. I think it was an Apple TV show about Elizabeth Holmes called The Dropout. And then there was another one, there was a documentary called The Inventor, Out for Blood in Silicon Valley. And they were both great shows, in my opinion. I enjoyed them just as much as each other. And whether you've read the book or not, they're terrific shows. But for those new to this story, let me just give a 20-second summary. Theranos was a business built on deception. And despite raising hundreds of millions of dollars and striking these really high profile deals with the drugstore chain Walgreens and Safeway, the technology never worked. It looked like, do you ever see one of these cubicle 3D printers? It was one of these kind of like 2-foot cubes, 2 by 2 by 2 cubes that went in a nice fancy room at the back of Walgreens, and patients, customers would go into the drugstore, get a pinprick, and it allegedly diagnosed ailments are not as it turned out to be. And the technology never worked. And Elizabeth Holmes and her COO was very heavily involved in the story. Sonny Balwani, I think was his name at the time. Sonny, anyway. Sonny
His
Balwani.
name at the time.
He probably still is. Although he has good reason to change it. But Sonny
I was about to
Balwani,
say he seemed like the person that might actually start up a new identity and try to grift
oh,
some more.
hold that thought, because honestly, this is where the story for me goes from the annals of business story to just shocking. So they manipulated test results. They misled regulators. They lied to investors. They were trying to, I suppose, blast a passageway through the snowstorm with lies and deceit. And the fallout was really brutal. And in 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of fraud and sentenced to just a little over 11 years in prison, which is a bitter pill to swallow. And another example of how white collar crime in America is comprehensively punished, where in other countries, less commercially evolved, it's like, you can't be doing that now. But anyway, she's gone and she is in prison, and she's serving time in a minimum security federal facility in Texas, I think it is. So the story might have ended there, but life generally brings a sense of irony. And this year, and it only caught my eye during the week, it emerged a new startup news of a new startup emerged called Haemanthus, and it's run by He-Man. That's how you
No,
He-Man.
they're not even like trying to hide it.
No,
Do you know what I mean?
Tyrannus
Like,
Haemanthus.
yeah.
I mean, seriously, but don't wait till you hear it. So a new startup has emerged called Haemanthus, and it's run by a guy called Billy Evans, who is none other than Elizabeth Holmes's partner and the father of her children. And
Mm.
the company is
And
currently, yeah,
she had these children with him in the time between, like, before she got into jail, like, but she was convicted, wasn't it? Isn't it that like time when she was on bail essentially?
I remember the photographs of her heavily, like kind of in the later stage of pregnancy in the papers and whatever it was I was reading. So I'm not too sure, but you're right. She had her civil liberties when she had the baby, from what I can.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, but so the company Haemanthus is currently in early development, and it's building you guess it, AI powered diagnostics tool that relies on photonics, which is light detection to analyze bodily fluids. So the comparison with Theranos is just off the scale. Now, especially when you consider Evans's intimate ties to Elizabeth Holmes and just how much it looks and sounds and smells like Theranos. And Haemanthus is already under intense scrutiny. So the question is this a whole new paradigm in diagnostics? I hate that word paradigm, but that's really the question. Or is it just Theranos 2.0 with some new branding? So Billy Evans, the man behind the business, he's no stranger to privilege. He's a graduate from MIT, and he's an heir to the Evans Hotel Group. So he could do nothing and have a comfortable life. But he met Holmes after Theranos started to unravel, and she's kind of remained the public face of Theranos, as you might expect, notwithstanding the TV show and the book and the fact that she was the promoting CEO and founder, but she's always been the face of Theranos along with Sonny Banwali or whatever. And but Evans, he stayed out of the spotlight. He's a new name, and in all the different missives out there about Theranos, I can't even recall seeing his name if it ever appeared. I don't think he was ever mentioned, but that changed abruptly for me in the last couple of weeks, actually in the last week, where it was revealed that he had raised hundreds of millions for Haemanthus from family and friends. No, correction. He hasn't raised hundreds of millions. He's raised millions. I think he raised 20 million from family and friends and select investors and the rest. And the company's name is derived from a Greek word which means blood flower. So it's a really, as you said, not in any way subtle nod to, I guess, where Theranos came from and its mission, which is improving health diagnostics. But according to a statement on its own website, Haemanthus aims to leverage AI and photonics, which is a very well proven technology called Raman spectroscopy, which extracts molecular patterns from fluids and saliva and blood and urine and all liquids inside the human body. And it's not a new tech, but has found applications in areas like cancer diagnostics and neurodegenerative disease detection. What's the fluid in the spine? Is it synovial fluid? When they tap in and
Your
you know
guess
when
is
they
as good
put
as mine.
yeah, when they put the needle into, I know, I can think of 5, 6 doctors who I know personally listen to this show and they'll be shouting it. But it's funny. But anyway, all the fluids in the body, they contain some very, very valuable information. And this key innovation that Haemanthus is claiming is its ability to combine light-based technology with AI to interpret complex biological data at earlier stages than the current diagnostic tools that are out there. And it has tried to distance itself from Theranos. And it says,
How has it tried to distance himself now? If you go and by a name that's almost the exact same, the baby daddy of Elizabeth Holmes, I'm sure she's completely involved. Maybe
yeah,
she's not legally allowed to be, but like her influence is all over it. So
yeah.
where's the distance there?
Look, it's hilarious. So on the website, it literally says This is not Theranos 2.0. It says it. It's kind of if you wake up and there's someone standing over you and they go, I didn't kiss you. You're like, oh God. What?
Jesus.
What
I hope,
happened?
hope that's not a specific memory, Emmet, is it?
Not at all. But it's kind of like it's so you can't say you're not something. It's just like what? So they're saying on the website this is not Theranos 2.0, and it goes on to say Theranos attempted to miniaturize existing tests. Our approach is fundamentally different, and of course that's a very important distinction. And Theranos used commercially available machines to run its tests, claiming there was something else. I mean, it literally was just existing tech
It was pure grift. Like they didn't have any
nothing
proprietary tech at all. They were just using, wasn't it Siemens machines,
and
then pretending their own machines worked.
When I read that book, I was more early stage entrepreneur than I am now, for sure, and I wanted to feel forgiveness towards Elizabeth Holmes, going, look, you need to keep pushing against everything. But she went so far outside the envelope of acceptable, bending the truth here and there. She was smashing new lies every day.
Yeah.
But
it was such a snowball of fake it till you make it. And
oh yeah. I mean, like in contrast to Theranos, Haemanthus is developing a platform on distinct, albeit unproven, combination of photonics and AI. But you know,
that's what they're saying.
Yeah,
I mean,
and exactly.
Theranos said an awful lot of what they were doing as well. That doesn't mean they actually did it.
And by saying, look, we're not Theranos 2.0, like when you're explaining, you're losing. Like when someone doesn't get a joke and you're explaining to them, you know, there's going to be no laughs here. So when you say, I'm not Theranos 2.0, everyone goes, oh, you're Theranos 2.0. Now, the optics are so impossible to ignore, which is what completely shocked me when I read the story. Apart from the fact that Evans is Elizabeth Holmes' life partner, or at least current life partner, the reports are suggesting that she's advising him from prison, which is hardly surprising. Though Haemanthus is denying she holds any formal role, and given her conviction, she's also barred from leading any public company, and her name would be toxicity or a toxic thing to attach to any company, but her specter looms. And Haemanthus has adopted a tone of this kind of defiant transparency. We acknowledge the elephant in the room and skepticism is rational, they wrote in a public statement, and we have to set a clear, higher bar. It sounds like Elizabeth Holmes, and it's almost confrontational in its posture, and explain what a virtuous organization is. But with all of that said, there are a few reasons why it might actually be the real deal. As I said already, like this Raman spectroscopy is a credible, peer-reviewed technology. Spectroscopy has existed since I was studying physics in 25, 30 years ago, and it is a proven science that is not fiction, and it involves shining light on a sample and analyzing the way the light scatters to detect molecular composition. So light goes in, light comes out. You look at what happened when the light comes out, and you can infer, you can deduce with certainty certain things by how the light on the other side looks. And that sounds for me like a perfect technology to combine with AI, where tons of processing is required. And like the system could theoretically identify diseases in ways that traditional labs cannot. But on top of that, the company claims to be focused on patterns as opposed to diagnostics per se. So there's a subtle shift that might exempt it from the regulatory burdens that cripple Theranos. So rather than saying, no, we're going to diagnose it. So for you, Michael Mahoney, we're going to go, no, we're going to use it to find patterns. But Haemanthus is going to eventually pursue FDA approvals. And it is truly, I think, a fascinating story. As I said, the early funds have come from what NPR said is friends and family and supporters, and the business has filed for at least one patent that I could see, and it's indicating it's serious about it's building up an IP book, as it were, and having a good data bank of intellectual property. It remains its infancy. There's no commercial product has been released, no health system endorsements out there. no revenue. It's a concept play for now. And despite the fact that Elizabeth Holmes is out of the public eye, in February 2025, she did an interview with People magazine and revealed that she's continuing to work on new ideas and filing patents. And she expressed her desire to return to the biotech world once she's released. So it's hard to imagine how she could successfully do that, because her credibility is blown to bits. So she really needs to walk on water. I mean, her name alone sends shivers through an average audience of well-read investors, and she is undeterred, which is in keeping with the character that you see come out from the book or the TV show or the movie about her life. She seems undeterrable. And I suppose if you're in the slammer until something like April 2032, you need to apply your life experiences to something. I heard most guys go in and just lift weights. I'm going to lift a few weights, then I'm going to then we have a chin-up competition where, like, those who are more intellectually leaning, like I assume Elizabeth Holmes, she's like, you know what, I'm going to write a few patents. But anyway, there's so many questions about this. I was just knocked sideways when I saw that her life partner was in on a business that looks, sounds, and smells just like Theranos. But what I would say before I wrap this, Mike, is that if he doesn't, if it isn't a success, that's fine. It will be thrown into the scrap heap of businesses. But if it is a success, this will be what's it like? It'll be like Elizabeth Holmes's name will very quickly attach to it, and she'd be like a phoenix rising from the ashes. She'd be like, I advised him from prison. I knew what I was doing. So, it's a business worth keeping an interested eye on. And as I suppose I'll conclude by saying, like, trust, as everyone knows, must be earned and science must be proven. And a post-Theranos world, the burden of proof is way heavier than for any other type of startup when it comes to health. And rightly so, because Theranos is trying to meet a standard by being more open and more methodical and seemingly more humble, but it's very humble braggy, if you know what I mean. So it's a fascinating story. Keep an eye on it, folks. I think we're going to see there might be a second book written in bad blood by like, if there's enough in that story, give it a few more years and we're going to have a part 2 for Bad Blood.
Yeah, geez, it's chronic. I mean, there's so much barefaced grifting going on these days in financial markets and crypto and all the rest. It's really tough to keep a positive outlook on things. Like, as in, there doesn't really seem to be any comeuppance for an awful lot of shady dealing. And you see this, and you see, like, Elizabeth Holmes, the poster child for absolute, like, BS.
Yeah.
And how she's in the prison. She went to prison last year, the year before.
I think it was the year before.
And somehow she's there, and, like, obviously she's not attached, but she's clearly attached to a business that's already raised millions doing the exact same thing. And, like, I don't know. It would kind of, if you cared enough, which I don't think I do, it would kind of get you down. But
yeah, it beggars belief. But it also shows that America is a country that punishes hard and forgives fast. Like, you do your time. What is do the crime, do the time, and then America's a country more so than any that affords a person a second chance, I believe. If the movies are to be, if Andy Dufresne is to be believed, you dig your way out, you're allowed a second chance.
Yeah, and then there's the attention economy of it as well. Like, and I'm surprised. I don't know. I'm surprised they haven't, like, tried to raise money through crypto to fund this thing. To be honest, some initial coin offering to back the business.
Yeah.
But anyways, we won't dwell. Haemanthus, watch out! I wouldn't invest in it with your money.
And it wouldn't, certainly the story would never make the light of day at its current stage, only for the fact that Elizabeth Holmes is not an advisor. So there you have it. So you have an interesting story that you said will somehow morph into a stock that's interesting you. What's going on?
This is as good a time as any to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by Profit. Profit is my Wall Street's breakthrough investing solution. It has gone through more than 16 years of rigorous testing and has averaged a 21.6% annual return. That is just mind-blowing. And the absolute best part for you and me is that it takes just 5 minutes a month, no expertise required. Luckily for you, as it's just making its public debut, Stock Club listeners can take advantage of a 3-month free trial right now. So head to the website, useprofit.com. That's profit, Prophet, or just head down to our link below and use that. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, well, so sorry, it's the stock and story go together. It's not exactly groundbreaking, but it is maybe the one stock to miss this recent rally, and that's Google. So last Wednesday, it came out through Google's antitrust case against the DOJ that Google searches fell in Safari for the first time ever in the month of April. So that's something that has never happened in 22 years. This
Amazing.
guy, Eddie Q, I think he's a vice president at Apple. He was testifying in this antitrust case, and it came out that Google searches, at least through Safari, are actually falling. Stock fell 9% on the news, and it's a weird situation because it's kind of news we've been expecting for ages. We've seen how people's behaviors have shifted from Google search being the only option we've had for 20 years to go seek information to now we have generative AI, whether it be ChatGPT or any of the other parties. I think
TikTok
as well, I suppose.
Well, it's been kind of tongue in cheek, but there's probably truth in it.
There is, for very specific searches. I think you're completely right.
Good restaurants in New York, you go to TikTok and watch.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you yourself, you said that you go to ChatGPT first now. It's your first port of call, depending obviously on the search. Mm-hmm. So in spite of all that, and in spite of us seeing what happened around us, because we've been around generative AI for now, 18 months, 2 years, Google did just keep trucking along. There seemed to be no real dip in demand, at least from its financial figures. And here we have this very important, clear data point that says, well, now, for the first time in 22 years, Google may not be the go-to for people seeking information, or at least there are other options out there. Google came out with a statement. It said, we're continuing to see overall query growth in search, including on Apple's devices and platforms. It didn't single out Safari there. So maybe this is a very specific point and it's being cherry-picked because it goes against Google, and I'll get to that in a minute. But Google will go on to say, more generally, as we enhance search with new features, people are seeing that Google search is more useful for more of their queries, and they're accessing it for new things and in new ways, whether from browsers or the Google app or using Google Lens. And I guess what's that saying is that not only has Google search, not only have competitors been introduced to Google search, but in general, search has evolved. People are going to it for new things. And it doesn't have to be just Google search, just in general, this quest for information. However it has become more purposeful and there's become more options for people. Now, obviously, Google has Gemini front and center of its search platform. It'll probably be okay for the most part. I think that might be fair to say. ChatGPT is its first genuine competitor since Internet Explorer, maybe, but the ecosystem that Google has built around search is so much more than what anyone else is even close to. And I'm not even sure what ChatGPT, monetizing ChatGPT would look like. That would even, bringing advertising into the equation would seem even beneath OpenAI. Do you know what I mean? And its quest for AGI and just that they seem so above everything else.
I pay GPT a tenner a month.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So if ChatGPT, if that's its goal, is a subscription and we're not going to introduce ads, kind of means they're not really a competitor to Google. Do you know what I mean? Because Google doesn't make money from people searching in keywords. It makes money from selling ads to businesses. And if ChatGPT isn't going to be a competitor there, then not that Google is going to be safe. And I think there is a genuine threat here in terms of its absolute dominance. But the fact that people are getting very excited about, it's a bit like when people say the dollar will lose its value and it won't be the backup currency for the world economy, essentially. And everyone that story comes up every now and then. Everyone gets head over heels about it and likes to shout doom and gloom, and everything just keeps trucking along. And I think that might still be the case with Google as well, in the sense of Google will likely be fine. like this data point coming out during its antitrust trial, and ironically, it's probably a good thing that ChatGPT has popped up in such a way when it did, because there is a legitimate threat to the company's monopoly now.
Mm-hmm.
And so the DOJ is going after Google, saying it's completely monopolized search and wants to sell off Chrome and wants to break up Android. And these are extreme measures. Well, maybe actually this would be the catalyst to prevent it from doing so. Who knows? Like, I'd be very surprised to see an action that extreme be enforced, especially in this regulatory environment. But Trump has like come out and said like he doesn't like Google essentially, and what it's kind of done against him in the past. So that could be a factor in this. But the fact that, you know, this monopoly case is coming at this exact time, and we're seeing like this first drop in demand in 22 years come at this exact time while it's in the middle of this antitrust case, it's weirdly inversely playing into Google's hands somewhat. And that's what I kind of found so interesting about it, was like, is this bad news also good news? So that's why Google is the cheapest stock in the Magnificent Seven by a distance.
And
It's
has
still
been
at
for a
this
while,
huge moat.
hasn't Mike? It's kind of
100%. And
been,
I think this
yeah.
generative AI threat is hanging over it,
Mm.
hence why it won't receive the same valuation. But there's just so many arrows in its quiver that I think it makes a very interesting starting off point from here. And that bad news is also good news in a weird sense, especially throughout this trial. So
What
yeah,
do you
I don't
mean?
know.
Tell me more. What do you mean bad news is good news?
Well, if ChatGPT is a genuine threat to its search dominance, then it's not a monopoly. And so if it's not a monopoly, they don't have to sell Chrome and they don't have to break up the whole company like the DOJ wants. So yeah, it's a weird one, and I've always been interested in why Google is ignored for other members of the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're contrarian, I think if you're a contrarian, it makes an interesting entry point. So that was kind of the story and stock that kept my attention.
And you can see, like, when you go to use Google now, it's now using Gemini to write a summary at the top that most approximates the answer you're looking for, which I find very useful. Not as useful as GPT, which for me differentiates itself because one, it has a long memory. So you can come back to something you said to it 5 months ago, and I presume eventually 5 years later, and it will recall that end point where you finished a conversation, whether it was on a health matter or whether it was on something you were cooking or whatever. So it has a long memory, and I find that to be quite impressive. You can pick on up where that function doesn't exist with Google, and also the fact that, like, it gets straight. You don't have to sift through pages to then click in and further go digging for the information you're looking for. Is there when I just think about Google, just remind me, Mike, I should know this off the top of my head, what's their stakeholding in Waymo? I'm really putting on the spot now, but are they full? They're not full owners.
I think there's other investors, but I'm pretty sure they would be majority owners, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they do have series. You're right. They have a lot of arrows in their quiver. Is it quiver? Their scabbard.
Arrows
in their quiver. Yeah. So
with
with that absolute epic fail of idiom, I'm going to say yes. I agree with your overall assessment that Google is probably going to survive this antitrust. I think it's going to continue to prosper. I don't think it's going anywhere soon. And the fact that it has a substitute product for GPT, which will creep further and further into our lives. The other night, I got an email, and I opened it on my phone with the Gmail client. So my Wall Street email is served to me through the Google client. And as these things usually do, it said, hey, do you want us to write a response? And I clicked yes, because it was late. Usually I wouldn't bother with that. But what I found to be fascinating was that it wasn't a standard, response that just was a yes, that sounds good to me, looking forward to seeing you type email. It composed a response that was entirely like my tone of voice, which it has because I've written so many emails, and it exactly encapsulated my thinking. And I was really, really surprised at how effective it was at capturing exactly what I felt and how I would have expressed it. Now, whether it just got lucky or whether Google's application of AI is just getting better and better. As of course it is. I just thought that's cool. On 2 clicks, I was done. Where otherwise, I'd walk into my office and craft a
Yeah.
response, and at 11:30 at night, you mightn't always be in the mood. So yeah, very very much agree with your synopsis that Google is probably undervalued.
And just reiterating the point as well, I think the huge plus on Google's side is it doesn't seem like ChatGPT is too interested in advertising. I
Yeah.
don't know if that point is talked about enough. But yeah. Okay, what's stocks on your radar?
Right. Well, as you well know, Mike, when you think about batteries in our life, most people's relationship with batteries started with squeezing 2 Duracell AA batteries into whatever was left under the Christmas tree. And then their next relationship with batteries is maybe mobile phone, and then a laptop computer. And then eventually, for people who have gotten to that place, an EV. So batteries are getting bigger and more prevalent in all of our lives. And that's an obvious thing to say. But yet, battery innovation is only getting started. So those 2 AA's that you were squeezing into the toy on Christmas Day 30, 40 years ago haven't changed hugely. I mean, certainly the dimensions haven't changed, and sure, the battery life has improved, but basically battery tech has not moved. They're just bigger with elements that have improved. But solid state technology and wireless charging and now AI optimized power use are kind of rewriting the rules of battery tech. So the same way as those old batteries powered our toys, today's batteries are kind of powering revolutions in transport and computing and energy. And where all this goes next is the real story. Like it's only when you realize the importance of batteries in your life for your whole life, you realize that this is something that needs and is about to be revolutionized. So, I mean, what's the real story? I'm pretty sure that most EV buyers, like today, when you go to buy an electric vehicle today, most buyers, I'd say, consider what will happen if tomorrow they announce that they have a new model that doesn't go 500 kilometers per charge, but 2,000 kilometers per charge. That's kind of most thinkers' preoccupation when they buy an EV. It's like, I don't know if this is going to be wiped out as obsolete because of batteries, because it is going to happen. So on that, and to my point, Chinese battery maker CATL is poised to stage one of the most valuable market debuts of the year as it prepares to list on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 7 days from now, or 6 days from the podcast going live, 20th of May. And the company is already the world's largest producer of EV batteries, and it's going to draw some very serious investor interest, irrespective of tariffs and geopolitical headwinds and regulatory scrutiny. The world is
Yeah,
going
I
to be
mean,
watching this
just
one.
the size of the EV industry in China alone could power a
Yeah.
company of any size. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're dead. I mean, the size of the IPO is yet to be confirmed, but seemingly it's going to be slightly below the. So the company is, by the way, currently floated on the Shenzhen exchange, but it's going onto the Hong Kong exchange, which is regarded as, which is a factually more liquid and, if you like, more first world, more accessible. So its upcoming Hong Kong listing is really seen as a strategic move to broaden its capital base and global investor access. And it's really aggressively expanding its international presence. And the IPO will also serve as a barometer, I think, for foreign investor sentiment towards Chinese tech giants in the world. As you said at the top of the show, it's very hard to kind of predict the way relationships are going to change on a dime, but really it will serve as a temperature gauge on the day of how the world regards an investment in a Chinese giant. And one of the biggest drivers of the excitement for CATL's rapid pace is its innovation. It is innovating. Just in last month, it unveiled its second generation Shenzhen battery, which claims can deliver 520 kilometer range for your EV with just 5 minutes charge. And I remember, you mentioned Bill Mann. I remember Bill Mann saying to me how he had a Model S at the time, and he just wasn't comfortable with his wife going on a long road trip where she'd have to sit on the lot of some charging station in the middle of the night for hours to recharge the car. And that's a real concern that exists in the mind of anyone who buys an EV. But now we're talking about you can get 520 kilometers with a 5 minute charge, the same as putting petrol or gasoline in your engine. So if it's widely adopted, this breakthrough will significantly reduce charging time anxiety. It will further accelerate EV adoption around the world. And major automakers like Tesla and BMW, they already source or at least partner with CATL for battery tech. And this new gen could deepen those ties and open the doors to new markets. And I just think that this is one of those, what's the best way? It's almost a utilitarian tech. You buy the toy to put under the Christmas tree, and yeah, you will get batteries. It's not even considered, but batteries are at the heart of everything we're interacting with for most of our waking day now. And the leader in innovating that tech is going to grow. Like someone who makes batteries better, faster, slimmer, lighter, quicker charging, whatever, is going to grab more market share. Now, to be fair, the company's growth hasn't come without a good bit of controversy. And in January, the US Department of Defense added CATL to a list of firms that was allegedly linked to the Chinese military. So down with that kind of stuff. We don't want that. But the designation restricted business with certain US government agencies, but does not prohibit commercial activity with private US companies. So it's not like Huawei telecom technology where Uncle Sam said, we're not going to use any of that stuff. And by the way, if you're overseas, you better not use it either, because a bug can go either end, A or B. But this is just batteries are batteries. And so they're not going to be selling to a kind of a blacklist of American governmental agencies, which is actually very, very small, tiny, tiny microscopic particle compared to the real commercial activity. So it doesn't in any way impact the licensing deals with American automakers. And it today holds 1/3 of the global EV battery market share. Now, that to me sounds like a business worth watching. And I don't think anyone's watching it.
Okay, sounds good. So CATL.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's over there in Hong Kong, again, it's not going to be square and center. We switch on Bloomberg, it might get a passing headline, but if you're not on one of the two big US exchanges, your window space is quite limited, at least to the Western world. But I think going into Hong Kong, it's, if you like, the New York of China, of the Chinese empire, if that's the right expression. But it is like the most westernized of the cities in China.
Okay, good stuff. And that's all we have today for today's show. Emmet, thank you very much for joining me. Just a reminder, folks, as well, I know we're repeating what we said in the ad in the mid-roll, but if you want to sign up for Profit, you can do so today for absolutely free. It'll cost you nothing. You can try it out for an extended period. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine. You can cancel. You don't have to give us a dime. But all you need to do is sign up at useprofit.com, and it will, again, I'm repeating myself, it'll cost you nothing. What's to lose? Emmet, thank you for joining me, and thank you everyone for listening in. We'll talk to you next week.